Hi, and welcome to Less Chatter, More Matter, a podcast about all things communication without the waffle. I'm Mel Loy, and in this show, I'll give you short, punchy, practical communication tips and insights you can start using in your communication practices right away. I'm a former corporate communication executive who happily took a redundancy, started my own business, and never looked back. These days, I use my 20 plus years of experience to guide organisations of all shapes and sizes in how to communicate more effectively. I'm wife to Michael, auntie to 12 nieces and nephews, a gym owner, group fitness instructor, yoga teacher, and a bunch of other things as well. I promise these episodes will always be short, sharp, and insightful. So let's get amongst it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have your ears tuning into the show for another week. Now, October is Mental Health Month here in Australia, so I thought it would be a great opportunity to talk about how communication can impact how we create safe spaces to have conversations about mental health, particularly in the workplace. And it's even more fortuitous in a way that the theme for Mental Health Month in 2023 is we all have a role to play. And it's really about encouraging people to think about ways we can connect with the people around us. Now, I am no expert in this space outside of my own experiences with managing my own mental health and with helping others both personally and professionally. So I thought for this episode, I would interview somebody who actually is much more of an expert in this space. And I'm really excited because I got to interview one of my favorite people, Cherie Canning. Now, if you are in Brisbane and you're a leader or a woman in business, there is a good chance you crossed paths with Cherie and that it was a very positive experience. Cherie is a passionate optimist. She's an avid traveler and the founder and director of Luminate Leadership. After almost 2 decades of leading teams and running development training at Flight Centre Travel Group, Cherie and her husband Andy were thrown that redundancy curveball courtesy of COVID, like many of us were. But it was then that Cherie knew she had to follow her passion of leadership development, and Luminate Leadership was born. And Cherie talks a little bit more about that in our chat today. Cherie is passionate about creating training and development experiences that challenge people, inspire them, and give practical tools to create real-life impact in their workplaces and lives. In today's episode, Cherie and I chat about the kind of impact communication can have on mental health in the workplace, some of the ways to have respectful and meaningful conversations around the topic, and we even touch on some lessons learned from the young children in our lives. It was a great chat, and I've included a bunch of links in the show notes so you can check out Cherie's work and give her a follow. Speaking of Cherie, let's get amongst it. Here she is. Well, hi, Cherie. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mel. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on because I am a bit of a fangirl, not going to lie.
That's very kind. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. What do you do? How did you come to do what you do?
Yeah, great. So I founded a company actually almost the same time as your business, just about to be 3 years, called Luminate Leadership. And so I guess who am I though? Cherie Canning. So I'm a mum, a wife, and a founder of Luminate. For me, prior to COVID, it's probably the significant part of this story where I'd been at Flight Centre for 17 years and I was in leadership roles and some senior leadership, kind of like regional manager style roles and leadership development. And when COVID hit, both my husband Andy and I were both there and we got stood down. And I was on stand down for 7 months. And in that time, I knew all I wanted to do was the role that I'd previously been in at Flight Centre was leadership development. And I desperately wanted to do that in the real world. And to be honest, I applied for like 30 jobs and just got nowhere.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite demoralizing. I think
Yeah.
17 years in one company and you felt pretty comfortable in what you did. And anyhow, I think it came to that point where I decided I have to stop waiting for someone else to take a chance on me and maybe take a chance on myself. So started the business. And as I said, that's about 3 years ago now. And yeah, we've been working with some great businesses and brands doing their leadership development, doing leadership coaching, personal development workshops for their companies. So yeah, it's a bit of a dream now.
Yeah, it's amazing. And just following you on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and seeing how far you've come so quickly. And let's not forget the Women in Leadership Conference as well. Like that is
Yeah,
epic,
thank
that
you. Yes,
conference.
thank you.
Yeah.
And it was great to have you there. Yeah, Ignite, it was the second year that we ran it. It's such an inspiring day. Like I think I'm still feeling goosebumps of having this year we had 230 women in the room and a couple of fine good men as well. And incredible speakers, just different walks of life, different perspectives, just all about inspiring people to live their best, biggest life, really.
Yes, and I can attest from somebody who was there, it was an exceptional day, so well run, of course. I would not expect anything less.
Thank you. Yeah, it was great. Thank you. Thank you.
S- So, one of the things you do offer as a business is mental health first
Mm,
aid training, which is
it
why
is.
I've asked you to come on today because it is Mental Health Month. And I just want to ask you from your own experience here, having worked with leaders, in Flight Centre and in your current business,
Mm.
what kind of an impact can communication have on mental health in the workplace? Like in terms of the language that we use and the tone of voice and how we communicate.
Yeah, well, I think actually it has such a huge impact. And I have been thinking a lot about this. We had a conversation, my husband and I, with someone, I'm going to say of an older generation to
Mhm.
where we are. And in the early days of offering mental health first aid, and they said, "Oh, how's that going for you?" And we said, "Oh, yeah, it's going well." And then it started tapering off the demand for it at that time. And their response was, "Yeah, well, that's not a surprise because talking about mental health in the workplace is a career limiting move."
Oh,
And I was absolutely shocked. And, my husband responded immediately and said, "And that's the reason we're doing this." Because the fear and the misconception of how important or is this a workplace topic or not? I think that's part of the challenge that we need to solve. That's part of the stigma we need to remove because the human being, when mental health is impacted, is a human being, whether it's them at home or in the workplace. So the way that we approach it, I think, with empathy, with curiosity and compassion, rather than fear and judgment and I guess I really do think it comes down to fear. People don't know enough, so they don't
mm,
want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, so then they say nothing, which can be just equally as damaging.
that's a really good point. It's sort of sticking the head in the sand because it's uncomfortable for me as the communicator as opposed to thinking about what my audience needs. And
Yes,
that's a really dangerous space to
100%.
be in.
It
Yeah.
is because then the people who might be experiencing, mental illness or not feeling mentally well, they absolutely are sitting here thinking, I don't feel safe to open up. I don't feel comfortable to open up because this person is not giving me that space. I feel like the language that we use and the words that we choose, and I've seen a few posts going around this month with mental health awareness around even around suicide. Like we don't say things like we say died by suicide. We don't say committed suicide. We don't say
Mm,
failed suicide because even those words, the connotations of those words, they're so negative, and that just adds more shame. If you think about someone who's committed to jail, they've done something bad. But when we talk about committed suicide, it shouldn't be connected with such a negative connotation.
And it is such a powerful thing, language, right? I think a lot of people, certainly in my experience from comms world, don't realize the impact of the choices they make with language and whether that
Yes.
is mental health or neurodiversity or even just people's life experiences. That can have a massive impact on how people feel, as you say, feel safe in a workplace.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And we've got to take that responsibility to be aware of the word. And people, often you used to hear it all the time in the work you do as well, where people go, "Oh, that wasn't what I intended." Well, the reality, we do need to check in our intentions, but the reality is, how is that received by the person?
Mm,
And even just when we talk about language, I think being um, yeah, without sounding too serious, like this is no joke, mental health is not a joke. So using words like, "Oh, I feel so depressed today," if
mm,
what you mean is you're in a low mood. "Oh gosh, this anxiety is really getting to me," if what you mean is I'm under a bit of pressure. So I
mm.
think it's making sure we're not using these words that are diagnosed mental health conditions when it's just actually challenging emotional states.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I can relate to that. I know this isn't all about me, but I'm about to make it all about me.
Yeah, no,
But,
go, go, go.
but being somebody who is diagnosed with ADHD, I find it really frustrating. People go, "Oh, I'm so ADHD. I am so ADHD," or "This is an ADHD moment," but they're not diagnosed. They haven't been through that process. And for me, that is almost making light of some of the behaviors when, that's a behavior I really struggle to control without help.
Yes.
And so for me, I can really
Yes.
relate to that language use.
Yes. And it's like a complete empathy miss, if you like, or
Mm.
it's just really poor emotional intelligence because
Yes.
we're and unintended. I know it's mainly unintended, but
Mm.
yes, we use these expressions just so free. I mean, there's expressions now that I'm not even going to say on the podcast that we
Thank you.
used to use growing up in when I used to use growing up in the schoolyard that now we would never because it's really for sexuality, it's so discriminatory, like, it's terrible, and we know
Mhm.
not to use them now, and we wouldn't. So I think it's the same when it comes to mental health, and wellness, mental illness, and, neurodiversity as well is a perfect example.
Yeah. So we've touched on some challenges. Are there other challenges that leaders and team members face when communicating about mental health in a respectful way?
Yeah, look, I feel like sometimes it's probably not knowing how big the domain is in a way. So, I think that there might be some fear or people hold back from talking about it because they're worried. I think we've touched on that about worried about the impact that their words might have. But there's something I found really useful, and I love to share it when we're talking about these in workshops. Is about the mental health continuum. Are you familiar with that?
A little, but please for our our
Yeah,
readers
yeah,
and
for the
listeners.
listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is my interpretation of it, but if you think about a scale from one end of a continuum to another and almost color coding it. So you've got a green end, which is mentally well. You've got then, traffic light kind of colors. The next one is going to be yellow, which is, I'm under pressure. I'm not feeling great. I'm not at my best, but I'm okay, but I'm on the edge a little, if that makes sense. If I'm using the right language here. Then we go to orange, which is I am I'm not in a good place. I'm a bit of a downward spiral and I'm probably needing some extra support, maybe some different tools and strategies to get out of this headspace or this mental well way of being, I guess you could say. And then the red would be a diagnosed mental illness. Now we can go up and down that continuum. It's not a set thing. It's a completely, depending on the support you have and the scenario and the environment, we can go up and down. But what I enjoy about that, and I think is important to recognize, is for leaders, is to think about sometimes it's people in our teams are in the green and they're in the yellow. So if we're under time pressures, we're under stress at work, we're under deadlines, changes, external changes, environmental impacts of the economy, etc. So if we've got a lot of people going from that green into yellow, then we can take some smaller strategies. And I think um, often people might see these as fluffy strategies in their workplace, but I don't agree. I think it's, a little bit of an early mark. It's taking walking meetings with your teams. It's looking at the strategies we know, such as mindfulness and acts of kindness and gratitude and all of these, like being out in nature, connecting with people. So it's looking at some of those strategies that they're everywhere. If anyone wants, how do we improve mental health by 1%? These are things we could do in our everyday workplace. And they're not necessarily the solution if people are in the red place.
Mm.
I think the red space on the continuum, that's where we want to get professional support. That's where we absolutely, as leaders, are encouraging people in that orange and then red space. Okay, who else are you speaking to? Um, when I did the mental health first aid, I've done it twice now. And as you said, it's something that we now offer with our clients and to come into workplaces or we run public courses for it. And one of the analogies they gave, which has really stuck with me, is that if you saw someone, walking down the street and they fell over and they were bleeding and they needed support, you would ring the ambulance. You would ring 000. They would tell you while you're on the phone, I need an ambulance. Okay, what's happening? How do we keep this person safe until the paramedics arrive, right? Like
Mm.
it's kind of normal. But suddenly when it comes to mental health, I think that people get frightened that they need to have the solutions. I don't know how to deal with these situations. Well, no one's asking us to. What we need to do is get that person to the support they need, to a psychologist, to a counselor, to a GP, to a support line. There are so many resources for people to go and get the support, but it's not the leader's job to be the psychologist or have that conversation. It's the leader's job to connect them with the support they need.
That's a really good tip. And it's something I learned very early on as a leader. One of my first roles as a leader. And I think too, a lot of leaders are just thrown into, hey, you're a team leader now. Go lead.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
Yeah. Like, oh, okay. We're doing this now.
What do I do? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Which is actually part of the reason I'm developing a whole other course on first time leader communication skills, because been there, done that. But I was trying to solve people's problems instead of just recognizing that actually sometimes people just want to have a rant.
Absolutely. And so I think if we go into those really practical situations and conversations, as you said, I think it's, for the first time getting curious without judgment. What support can I give you today? What do you need to be in a better headspace or to be feeling um, to be at your best today, or something quite broad if they haven't expressed anything deeper yet. And then if a pattern occurs, because maybe it is, you know what, I actually just need to come in later tomorrow. Like I just need 1 hour to myself where I just will reset, or I haven't been to the gym all week. I haven't managed to get there. Could I just leave a little bit early today to get to that gym class? Yeah, absolutely. Then we can just ask, how's your
Mm.
mental health? And see what people say, and not to be afraid. There's actually not to be afraid of the response, just be open and curious and compassionate. There is an acronym in this little book. This is from the Mental Health First Aid, and they call it ALGEE, ALGEE. And it's like the action plan, if you like. The first is approach the person, assess and assist with any crisis. So that's if there is a crisis. Now,
Yeah.
in a workplace, occasionally there might be a crisis, but often it's not. So then the next, it is the L, listen and communicate non-judgmentally. And I think when we talk about non-judgmental, it's recognizing that everyone has that different history, and just, I guess, then goes to the G in this algae. So we've got approach the person, L for listen and communicate non-judgmentally. G is give support and information. So that would be, okay, do you want to catch up with me? Do you want to call a hotline? Do you want to go to your EAP, as an example? And then the E, encourage the person to get appropriate professional help. So in fairness, that would be when the EAP, or go and
Yeah.
see a GP and get your mental health plan. And then the E is encourage other supports. So who else can you speak to in your life?
Mm.
Where are you going to get that? And I think that's anything from stress all the way to diagnosed mental illness.
Yeah, I think that's a great acronym to in terms of just something that's easy to remember, which, from a comms perspective, you want things that are easy to pick up and use in the
Mm,
moment when you need them. You don't have to go searching for the handbook or those sorts of things.
yeah,
And I just want to
yeah,
take back to the spectrum. It reminds me a little bit, and I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but I have
yeah,
a lot of friends and family whose kids have gone through prep in recent years, and they teach them about those zones. Are you in
yeah,
the yellow zone? Are you in the red zone?
yeah.
And
That's my daughter right now in
yes, there
prep,
you go.
learning that. Exactly.
Yeah, my twin nieces are in prep doing the same thing. And I
Yeah.
love that they are teaching this kind of self-awareness and emotional intelligence from that age. I feel like I've had to learn that as an adult, whereas
Yep.
we're now seeing this come through in prep where they go, what zone are you in?
And do you know, it's so funny you use that example, because I speak to that a lot in the workshops, whether it's, I personally don't facilitate the mental health first aid. Our qualified instructor, Wade, does. But also we run resilience workshops and the emotional intelligence workshops. So it's all very interconnected. And in those, like, I'll often ask that, hands up, who here learnt about emotional regulation and talked about feelings, all feelings, in school? And of course, like, no one puts their hand up. And I just think this is incredible that children are now
Mm,
learning to express their emotions, to be able to be aware of their emotions and then how to regulate. Now, it's really simple for a child, but how often do we do that in our team?
mm,
And when we talk about being empathetic and non judgmental, I think it's Brene Brown. She says, empathy is not about connecting to the experience, but connecting to the emotion that underpins the experience. But if you
Mm,
don't know how to say those emotions or express those emotions, then how do you connect with people genuinely? And another one is Susan David's book called Emotional Agility.
ah,
And she often speaks about the importance of not labeling negative emotions or hard she calls them hard emotions, but not negative emotions. Because then when we say, oh, I don't want to feel anything negative, then things like sadness and anger and disgust and these emotions are almost not spoken about, and we almost push them under the rug rather than actually openly discussing with someone how they're feeling, which
mm.
then, can permeate into not feeling mentally well because you're holding on to all these heavy emotions without an outlet to express them.
Yeah, you've been told those hard emotions are a bad thing. And so
Yes,
to fit into social norms, then don't express ourselves, which just perpetuates what we've just been talking about, which is
exactly. And
not a
in the
safe
workplace
space.
too.
Yeah,
In the workplace
100%.
too. And I remember in the GFC, I was an area leader at Flight Centre, and we had a little area name was called Brigadoon. It's a random name, but that's what we're called. And I
I've
used
seen
to
the
have this
TV show.
slogan. Yeah, yeah, it's really anyway, I inherited that one. Um, and I had this slogan, and I thought what I was doing was being above the line and positive. And I had this slogan, and it was, "There's no doom and gloom in Brigadoon." And it was just focusing on what can we control right now, not looking at the GFC and what's external. Let's focus on what we can control. And for the most part, I think it was the right approach. But what did happen, what I learned later, is that people were too fearful to come and tell me what their fears and concerns were, because I was like, we're going to be positive. We're going to be positive. And now I know that's called toxic positivity. And again, I think I wasn't allowing people to express what was really going on for them. So I think that was a lesson I took with me into COVID. It's yes, and this is
Mm.
hard and we'll be okay. And again, with mental health, if people are in a bad spot, it's saying, I'm sorry that you're having this experience. Thank you for sharing that with me, and we'll get you the support. So you're not diminishing it, you're not putting it down, you don't make it better than it is, you don't make it worse than it is.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So, just quickly before we move to our final few
Mm.
questions, can you tell us a little bit about the mental health first aid training that your team offers? Like, what is it? Why do you think it's so important to have this training and have people trained in this in a workplace?
Yeah, great. So it is part of the Mental Health First Aid Australia. There's two options. So it's a 2-day face-to-face program, or there's a blended where you can do online learning and then face-to-face kind of debrief. I think for a lot of people, they've walked away understanding the language, like the nuances of the language and the way that we communicate. There's a lot to it. So there's a lot of what we used to say, how to identify, and what are the actual not so much how to diagnose, like that's not our place, but in a workplace to go, how am I noticing this? Is this anxiety? Is this substance use? Is this depression? Are they linked to those things? Is someone having a panic attack, and how do I support them? So you're looking at all those topics, if you like, over the 2 days. How do you identify it? How do you support them? What to do in a crisis? What language to use? It is not a light-hearted 2 days. It is really quite intense, and I say that because I think it's important people know what they're walking into. From that, you actually get a first aid certificate, and then the feedback is like, "I wish I'd done this sooner. I wish I knew this." The quality of the conversations now they're now able to have with confidence with their team has really been propelled as well.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there in terms of confidence, like being
Mm,
able to, any training you go to should leave you feeling more confident in a skill set. And this is a really, as we said earlier, one of those places where people are uncomfortable, particularly we're all uncomfortable. We don't have the confidence that we know
yeah.
what to do.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
fantastic. So, Cherie, there's
Yes.
3 questions I ask every guest on the podcast. Are you ready for those?
Yes. Yes. I think
Let's do
so.
it.
Yeah.
We'll soon find out. Okay. What's one of the best communication lessons you've ever learned, and how did it change the way you approach communication?
I would say one of the best is, I'm not always great at it, I'm still a work in progress, is silence.
Ah,
And specifically, I mean, in conversation, just to let people think and give them the time to reflect and be silent, not try and jump in to save them or to keep the conversation going. Um, that's been really powerful, and I think allowed some incredible conversations to take place through my career so far.
That's a great tip. It's actually something I learned very early on in journalism, where basically if you just stop talking, people say a lot of things they would say otherwise.
Right?
So, yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So it's a really good tip. The second question is, what's one thing you wish people would do more of or less of in communicating?
I would say it's to seek to understand, to genuinely find out what is that like for you. And if we have more curiosity, thanks Ted Lasso for bringing that on the map
Yeah.
as well. The more curiosity and seeking to understand, I passionately believe the world will be a better place because it's not trying to force someone to see my idea, but that curiosity and to seek, okay, well, where are you coming from? What can I learn from you?
I think that's excellent advice. And the final question, who do you turn to for communication advice?
Other than Ted Lasso, no,
I
I
love Ted Lasso. So
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm like, actually
Yeah,
Ted
yeah.
Lasso, but he's not really
Yeah.
real, but he is in my mind. Um, I would say from a professional perspective or someone I haven't met would actually be Brené Brown.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
a massive fan. And someone I have met and constantly call on through my life is my dear friend and mentor, Rachel O'Brien.
Fantastic. And what have you learned from Rachel?
I think with Rachel is around following your intuition. And actually, I think from a female perspective, embracing your feminine energy of compassion and empathy and kindness, and that it's a strength. For many years in my younger days in leadership, I kind of felt like I had to be a certain style of leader and a certain style of communicator, which was really challenging because it just wasn't who I was. And now through her, and I think that's also one of those lessons for me is um, just to be authentically you doesn't mean that you don't work on your blind spots or your weaknesses, but just own your style. And that she, for me, has been someone who really encourages those traits and also embodies them. So I think being able to see someone else embodying the kind of style and leadership I respect is, yeah, it's been a game changer.
Yeah. Authenticity has a way of really uplifting us once we are true to that. I find absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So, Cherie, how can people find out more about you and get in touch to learn more about not just mental health first aid training, but the other programs you offer?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. So we're at luminateleadership.com.au. Also, pretty active on LinkedIn and Instagram, a little bit on Facebook there as well. So our website, you can reach out to me. I think you're going to pop some links in there for my own personal Instagram and LinkedIn as well. And I love human connection. So even if it's just of interest, you can come and join. I think we've got not I think, we have a newsletter with Luminate as well. You can join via our web address and just follow along with different tips and tricks and hopefully some inspiration as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Cherie, for being on the show today. I've learned a lot from you and can't wait to see what's next for you and Luminate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope it's been of use for people. Thanks so much.